This project I'm going to be making some segmented rings just using basic tools that most of us already have without using a table saw. Hello there, it's Paul here and welcome along everyone. In the past, when I've done my segmented projects, I've always had the odd comment from people saying, I would love to have a go at that, but I don't have a table saw, or my table saw isn't very good, and I don't have a wedgie slit. Now with this project, I'm going to be using an ordinary mitre saw, which what most people have got. Now you can use the manual ones, I think they go as a precision mitre saw, and there will be no Jubilee clips, and we won't be using a digital protractor, and still trying to get the pieces as accurate as possible. If you've got an electric mitre chop saw like this, it's going to be a little bit quicker and hopefully a bit more consistent with your cuts all the time. But there's certainly no reason why with the manual mitre saw that you shouldn't get such good results. It just might take you a little bit longer. Setting up the saw is really the key part on this, and you need to worry about two things. First of all is the angle that we are cutting, 90 degrees, and for that you just want some form of a decent square just to lay it on the bed, and so that when you bring the blade saw down you can check that it's cutting 90 degrees. Now the other thing you also need to measure is the actual cut angle that you want to measure, and if you haven't got a digital protractor you can use something like this, but it's not going to be nowhere near as accurate, and there are other methods as well. When I first started doing segmented work, I think I went onto SketchUp and I made several of these and just printed them out, and they are an absolute ideal guide to give you your measurement. Now using these templates like this are absolutely ideal, and if you do create them in something like SketchUp, when you print them you want them as big as possible, because the longer these lines are, the more accurate you're actually going to do your measurements. Now this is one that I bought, I think it was to measure the angles on some of my tools, which I never ever use no more, and I've set this to 75 degrees on here, so it would be the 15-degree angle, and it does match up reasonably well, so that is reasonably accurate. But trying to then use this on the saw is then going to become a lot harder. Now when I built my shed I bought one of these, and I don't know what they're called, I think it's something like a carpenter square or something like that, and this is more ideal because you can line this up totally on there to get what would be our 75-degree angle there, which would then be that 15-degree cut. Once you've got that, you can then take that to the saw and hopefully line it up a lot easier. Now measuring the actual angle of the blade here for the cut, it's far better to keep the thicker wooden part against the fence, and then you've got this narrower part to go along the blade so that you can actually miss where the teeth are again. What you'll also find as well is that a lot of these saws already have predefined marks for their angles, and they are really there for a pretty rough guide for what you want for segmented work. So it is important to measure those angles as accurately as possible, because it will just save you sanding work later on. The final thing to do on here then is to mark out your stopper block for how long you want your pieces. Now hopefully you can see here on the corner of my lathe I've got a small piece of oak block. It's just under 80mm in diameter. It's about 77mm, which is 3 inches. And I want to make some segmented rings on there. My plan initially will probably be to put some open segmented rings on first and then cap it off with a closed segmented ring, and I'm going to concentrate on the closed segmented ring first because I've now got this set up for the right angles. I'm working out on the basis here that I need to create a 90mm closed segmented ring for the top, because I shall just bring this out slightly, so it's going to end up like some form of a small bowl. Now I do have a spreadsheet which I will put a link below to where you can download it from to work out all these calculations which I've mentioned to in the past. However, there's also an online segmented calculator, which I will also put a link below. But I normally prefer to use my own spreadsheet because it gives me a lot more choice of the dimensions I want to choose. For a 90mm segmented ring on the online one, says I need pieces on an outside cut length of about 24.2mm. So I'm going to try and set this up to do cuts around about 24 to 25mm. Now, because I've got my stopper block this side of the saw, it's going to become a bit more difficult for me to check my measurement because I've got to look under the motor here. The reason I've done that is that when I put my piece of wood in and hold it in place, I would rather be holding it from this side because I'm right-handed using the saw. Now, there's various ways you can do this. You can mark out on a piece of wood where you want to do your cut length. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just measure on the end of this piece of wood where I want my 25mm. Now, I've got a pencil mark on the wood there for where I need to cut. I can then place that in there and hopefully line up where my blade needs to be. The only problem of doing the saw this way compared to when you use the table saw, now every time you've actually made your cut, you've got to leave the blade in a down position like that and then wait for it to stop before you can lift it up. If you lift it up while the blade is still spinning, you're likely to ruin the piece you've just cut. And the other thing you need to do as well is that every time you do a cut, you've got to flip your piece of wood over 180 degrees so that you get the right angles both ways. Now, I'm just going to plug my saw in. I'm also going to use this piece of wood a bit like I did in the segmented lighthouse, so that the narrower part is going to be the thickness of the wall and the thicker part is going to be the height. So the first thing I need to do is do my first cut, and I just want to cut the angle off the end so that I've got the starting point. Now, this is where you can actually then test your angles, and hopefully you can see there that that looks absolutely spot on for the 75/15 degrees we set. Now, the other problem you've got as well is if your wood is not fully square, then that 90-degree angle might be slightly out, and it shouldn't be too much of an issue. It just means that once you've got all your pieces glued together, that you're going to have a little bit more sanding to make the top and bottom flat. So I've got my first piece cut there, and as you see, I could lift the blade up while the blade was still spinning because I wasn't actually up to the stopper block. Now, for this next one, I've actually took this up to my stopper block, so hopefully we're going to get a 24/25mm cut. And this time when I cut it, I'm holding this in place and I've got to wait for the saw blade to stop when I take the piece out. So there is my first piece cut. Now, the important part now that I've got on there is that I've got the right length, and I'm showing on there I am just over 24mm long. So I've now checked my piece there and I've got the size that I wanted. I'm around about 24mm on there, so hopefully that should be fine, and I can go off now and cut all the other 11 pieces that I need. So I've now got my 12 pieces that I need there to make up my segmented ring. Hopefully they're not too far out. Now, with all the pieces cut, you will often get these little fuzzies on the side here. And I've only got 12 pieces here, so it's a nice quick and easy job to do anyway, is just put a piece of sandpaper down on a flat board, just gently sand over all 12 sides. And that has now just tidied that up. Now with Badook, I find that you often do get these bits of chip outs, but where it happens on the edges, on the corners there, that's not so much a problem, because when you've got your segmented ring made, you're actually going to be taking out that corner to make this round. A lot of people will use a Jubilee clip here. They will put lots of glue on all the pieces and then bound them all together with a Jubilee clip. What I always find is that when I make my pieces up like this, my angles are never always fully accurate. So even though I've got 6 pieces there, I can see that I'm going to probably be out on my angles a bit, which is why I like to do it this more manual way, because my angles are never fully accurate. Now the idea here will be to first of all glue these up in 2s, probably four lots of 2s like that, and then go back and then make them 3s, and then finally make them into 6s like that. And the reason for that again is because of this inaccuracy with the angles. Once we've got 2 halves like that, I can then sand those flat so that these bottom edges are totally flat. When we've got both halves totally flat, we can then glue the 2 halves together. All as I do is have a glue pot with me. I use a piece of baking paper, greaseproof paper, so that I can glue these on here and it's going to peel off fairly easily if it gets stuck. And you don't, some of these are a little bit porous with the tear out. You shouldn't need too much glue, just enough to cover it. And then once you've got your pieces held together, just hold them in place for about 15 to 20 seconds. So that's now had 20 seconds. I can lift that off there, just gently wipe off any excess, and that's the first piece glued together. And I will just go through and repeat this for all the pieces, so I get my 4 2s to start with. So now I've got those 4 2s done. The earlier ones should be holding a lot better, so I can then carefully turn these into 3s. Now, once I've got my 3s, I can then turn them into 6s. So that's the 2 halves now glued up, and hopefully you can see there the gaps that we've got, and that's caused by the inaccuracies of when we did the cuts. I've also got the odd joint which is not a really clean cut. That might look better when it's finished and turned. So I'm now going to leave, because I need to sand these flat that way across the base. I'm going to leave these now for at least 30 minutes. Now these have been left about an hour, so they're certainly dry enough, and I think as you can see there we've got quite a gapping for where they won't meet, and this is why it's always good when you do segmented rings full stop like this to do them in halves. Now I was using ordinary EvoStick wood PVA glue just for ordinary internal use, and the good thing about this, it dries clear. What I need to do now is get these so that they are going to join properly, and the best way to do that is to sand them on their ends like that. So the easiest way, again keeping away from specialist tools, is to use a piece of sandpaper flat on a board like that. Now if you're a bit worried that you're going to tip at either side as you sand, what you can also do, if you bring up a straight edge like that and then just hold your piece against the work. Now I've got a fairly rough piece of sandpaper here to start with, because a fair bit has got to come off these. So that's the first one done. That should sit nice and flat. I just need to do the second one, and hopefully we can start seeing that gap start to reduce. So that's now sanded back flat. It looks like I've got a bit of gapping here, and that's basically because I've got the tear out on the side there, but it is just on this top corner here where I've got the tear out there. Right, so I should just glue that up in exactly the same way, and because it's just the two halves to be glued now, just as easy to put a blob of glue on each end. And that just wants about 30 minutes to dry off properly before we can do the next stage.